Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever stared at a glowing red "You died" screen in Dark Souls, you know exactly how punishing this game is. But honestly, equally punishing, it's incredibly obscure storytelling. It's the kind of game that drops you headfirst into a hostile world and just absolutely refuses to hold your hand, or even, tell you what's going on. But what if I told you the story is actually there? It's just hiding in plain sight. Today, we're handing you the decoder ring. We're going to break down exactly how this masterpiece communicates its deepest themes without saying a single word.
To really get this game, we have to look at its creator, Hidetaka Miyazaki. So picture this. As a kid, he loved reading English fantasy books, but his reading comprehension, well, it wasn't quite there yet. So whenever he hit a part of the story he couldn't understand, he'd just look at the artwork and use his imagination to fill in the blanks. Decades later, that exact childhood habit actually became the foundational philosophy for Dark Souls' sparse narrative. The game completely relies on unspoken storytelling, making you, the player, do the heavy lifting to piece the lore together.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the Dark Souls enigma. Second, a posthumanist philosophy. Third, the power of light motifs. Fourth, Gothic tropes in combat. And finally, the ultimate cycle. Section 1. The Dark Souls enigma. Setting the stage. Before we analyze the hidden languages, let's do a super quick refresher on the universe's timeline. We start with a formless age of ancients and then move to the advent of fire. This introduces disparity, right? Light and dark, life and death. These nearly mindless creatures called hollows are drawn to the first flame. They claim these incredibly powerful lord souls, and they become the lords who usher in the age of fire. But our games take place at the tail end of these eras. By Dark Souls 3, eons later, the first flame is fading, and the world is literally falling apart. That is the exact context and the central problem we're trying to solve here. Section 2. A post-humanist philosophy, the first hidden language. Underneath all the swords and dragons, the game operates on a very specific academic framework that completely challenges how we view ourselves. According to scholar Marco Caracciolo, Dark Souls actively subverts Western humanism. Now, in Western ideology, there's a heavy focus on human exceptionalism, this idea that humans are autonomous, central, and inherently separate from the physical world. But Dark Souls pivots hard away from this. It draws deeply on East Asian philosophies like Shinto animism and Buddhist rebirth. It wants to unsettle our assumptions about human autonomy and replace them entirely with open subjectivity. So what does this actually mean in the game? Well, it means there's a fundamental continuity between the human and the non-human. Biological and environmental realities are totally blurred. In Dark Souls, humanity and souls aren't just abstract ideas. They are literal, physical fragments of power that characters consume, lose, and fight over. You're not exceptional in this universe. You're just another vessel for these continuous, interconnected forces. Actually, this is exactly why losing your souls upon death feels so mechanically devastating. You aren't just losing points. You are literally losing pieces of your continuous existence. Section 3. The power of light motifs, the second hidden language. Okay, this is where things get incredibly cool. What isn't spoken in the game's dialogue is directly communicated to you through the orchestral score. To understand this, we need to borrow a term from film scoring and Richard Wagner, the leitmotif. Basically, a leitmotif is a musical phrase strongly associated with a specific person, place, or idea. Think of Darth Vader's Imperial March. Dark Souls uses these, but in very disguised, deeply narrative ways. Now, what's really interesting here is the harmonic motion. If we compare the intro for the Firelink Shrine, which is a sanctuary built around a bonfire linked to the first flame, to the intro music for the final boss of Dark Souls 3, the Soul of Cinder, well, the bass voice motion in the opening chords perfectly matches. The Soul of Cinder is the physical manifestation of the first flame, so the composers brilliantly use the exact same harmonic motif from the shrine's bonfire to establish that connection musically. No words needed. But the absolute most famous musical language in the game belongs to Gwyn, the final boss of the very first game. After dozens of hours of massive, bombastic, orchestral boss fights, you finally reach the final encounter, and you hear this, a somber, minimalist solo piano. Players affectionately call this descending arpeggio pling pling plon. It completely subverts your expectations of a grand epic finale. It tells you, again, without a single word, that Gwyn isn't a triumphant god anymore. He's a tragically ironic figure who sacrificed himself to the very flame he sought to protect. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive, long game the composers were playing. Eons later, in Dark Souls 3, you fight the Soul of Cinder. Right in the climax of the battle,
the music shifts. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a piano joins the massive orchestra and begins playing Gwyn's exact plin plin plon motif. Why? Because the soul of Cinder is an amalgamation of everyone who ever sacrificed themselves to the fire, and that includes Gwyn. The music is literally conjuring the ghost of the first game's final boss, totally cementing the cyclical nature of the universe.
Section 4. Gothic Tropes in Combat. Horror in Sound.
The musical storytelling doesn't just do epic tragedy either. It does pure horror, leaning really heavily on 1930s Gothic film tropes. Music scholar Trey Bryant points out 4 specific audio techniques used to make players deeply uncomfortable. First up is schizophrenia. That's hearing sounds that are completely detached from their source. Then there's hauntology, which is using familiar conventions in weird, melancholic ways. We also see excessiveness, basically flooding the scene with overwhelmingly loud orchestration. And finally, transgression, moving audio completely into the supernatural or the other.
We can map these exact 4 tropes perfectly onto the final boss of the series' downloadable content, Slave Knight Gale. Now, Gale is a former ally who's gone entirely deranged from consuming the dark souls of humanity. The fight happens in 3 distinct phases, and the audio design dynamically tracks his descent into absolute madness.
In Phase 1, you're standing in this massive, barren wasteland of ash. You start hearing the faint cries of souls, but there's no clear source. Are they the dead pygmy lords? Or, wait, are they the souls trapped inside Gale's stomach? That right there is schizophrenia. At the same time, the score is strangely melancholic and neo-romantic. It completely clashes with the brutal, bestial combat happening right in front of you. That hauntology creates a deeply, deeply unsettling dissonance. Then, as you push him into phases 2 and 3, the music absolutely explodes. I mean, sweeping string arpeggios, brass fanfares, and full choirs just flood your ears. This excessiveness mirrors the overwhelming nature of the fight, especially as a chaotic torrent of flaming souls literally erupts from his body. The biogetic sound, the actual in-world audio of lightning strikes and wind, blends seamlessly with the chaotic score to signify total transgression. He has become a supernatural monster, and the soundscape drags you right into that horror with him.
Section 5. The Ultimate Cycle, Bringing It Together. Let's synthesize everything we've uncovered today from these brilliant academic sources. So the crucial point is this: the philosophy and the music are perfectly mirroring each other. Carcillo showed us how the game rejects Western humanism in favor of an East Asian philosophy of open subjectivity and Buddhist rebirth. Meanwhile, Bryant showed us how the musical leitmotifs literally rebirth older themes, just like Gwyn's piano motif returning eons later. It's one unified theory. Dark Souls is fundamentally a story about cyclical history. Everything gets a return before it inevitably comes to an end. It's an absolute masterclass in unspoken narrative. By forcing you to piece together the fragments of humanity, and by speaking directly to your subconscious through deeply calculated leitmotifs and gothic horror soundscapes, the game makes you live its philosophy. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder. When a game completely strips away the dialogue and exposition, how much of the story are you actually playing, and how much are you simply feeling through the sound? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep your ears open and keep learning.